The Ice Palace of Solitude. Let it go, they whisper to themselves as you walk away. But what they're letting go of isn't their pain or their fear. It's the last fragile thread connecting them to the warmth of human love. In this moment, as your footsteps echo into silence, something beautiful and terrible happens within their heart. The ice doesn't melt. It spreads. You might have hoped that your absence would awaken them, that the cold reality of losing you would somehow shock their frozen heart back to life. Perhaps you imagined they would realize what they had lost and come running after you with newfound appreciation for love. But that's not how winter works when it's taken residence in someone's soul. When you leave an avoidant, you don't inspire them to thaw. You give them permission to freeze completely. Like a queen retreating to her ice palace high in the mountains, they withdraw into the crystalline fortress of their own making, where no one can reach them and, more importantly, where they can never accidentally hurt anyone again with their inability to love properly. Your departure doesn't feel like loss to them. It feels like relief from the exhausting performance of pretending to want connection. The truth is both heartbreaking and liberating. They get worse when you leave, not because they miss you, but because your absence removes the last external pressure to remain even partially human. Without you there, gently trying to coax warmth from their frozen heart, they can finally stop pretending they're capable of spring. This isn't cruelty, though it may feel that way. This isn't revenge, though it may wound you deeply. This is simply what happens when someone who has spent their entire life afraid of their own emotional power finally gets permission to disappear completely into the safety of endless winter. They don't retreat to punish you. They retreat to protect themselves from ever feeling that vulnerable again. They don't become colder to hurt you. They become colder because warmth has only ever brought them pain, and your leaving confirms their deepest belief, that love is just another word for eventual abandonment. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, and in their kingdom of isolation, they are finally perfectly alone, just as they always believed they were meant to be. But understanding their spiral into eternal winter doesn't mean you have to freeze alongside them. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone lost in their own blizzard is to find your way back to summer and let them choose whether they ever want to leave the cold behind. Chapter 1. The Blizzard of Panic. The moment your presence disappears from their world, something inside them begins to howl like wind through an empty castle. But this isn't the howl of missing you. It's the sound of their carefully constructed emotional system collapsing without the foundation you unknowingly provided. You see, you were never just their partner. You were their anchor to the world of feeling, their proof that they could exist in relationship without destroying everything beautiful that dared to come near them. For months, maybe years, your steady presence created a kind of emotional weather system that kept their internal blizzard manageable. Your consistent love didn't melt their ice, but it did provide enough warmth to keep the storm from consuming everything. You were like gentle sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows, not enough to create spring, but enough to make winter bearable. Now that gentle light is gone, and the storm inside them has nothing to push against, nothing to moderate its fury. The blizzard that was once contained by your presence now rages freely through every corner of their inner world. They panic, not because they miss your love, but because they've lost their weather barrier against their own emotional chaos. They don't know how to regulate their inner climate without you there as a reference point. You taught them, without either of you realizing it, how to exist in the borderland between complete isolation and terrifying intimacy. You created a safe middle ground where they could practice being almost human, almost connected, almost capable of warmth. Without you, they have no map for this middle territory. They know how to be completely alone. That's their default setting, their survival mode, their ice palace where everything is controlled and predictable. And they know how to be overwhelmed by intimacy. That's their nightmare, the thing they've spent their whole life running from. But that gentle space you created between total isolation and complete vulnerability, that dies when you leave. The panic isn't about losing you specifically. It's about losing their training wheels for human connection. You were their practice person, their safe space to experiment with letting someone matter, without it meaning they had to fully surrender their frozen fortress. Now they're left with only two options, complete isolation or complete exposure. and for someone who has lived their entire life afraid of their own emotional intensity, complete exposure feels like death. So they choose the other option. They choose the familiar cold. They choose the blizzard they know over the warmth they fear. Your departure doesn't make them realize they want love. It makes them realize that even the safest version of love is too dangerous for someone made of ice. The storm inside them intensifies because they're no longer fighting to contain it. They're no longer trying to be someone who could love you back. They can finally stop pretending to be capable of spring and surrender completely to the winter that has always felt like home. Chapter 2. Building higher walls. In the wake of your departure, they don't tear down the walls that kept you at arm's length. They reinforce them with materials stronger than anything they've ever used before. Like Elsa discovering that her powers grow more dangerous when she's afraid, they find that their capacity for emotional distance expands exponentially when they're protecting themselves from the pain of abandonment. Every brick they add to their fortress is inscribed with lessons learned from loving you. Never let anyone get close enough to leave. Independence is the only reliable constant. People always choose themselves in the end. They take the experience of losing you and transform it into architectural plans for a more perfect prison, one that will never allow such vulnerability again. You might think this construction project would be painful for them, that building these new barriers would feel like self-imposed exile. But there's something almost euphoric about the process. After months or years of the exhausting work of trying to be someone who could love you properly, the retreat into isolation feels like coming home. The familiar cold embraces them like an old friend who never asks for anything they cannot give. They're not building walls to keep love out. They already know how to do that. They're building walls to keep their own longing in, because the truth they can't bear to acknowledge is that somewhere, in some small corner of their frozen heart, they did want to love you. They did want to be capable of the warmth you offered. They did want to be someone who could choose connection over safety. But wanting something and being capable of it are different things entirely. And your leaving proves to them that they were right to doubt their own capacity for sustainable love. If they couldn't make it work with you, patient, understanding, accepting you, then clearly they are simply not meant for the kind of love that other people seem to navigate so effortlessly. Each new wall is a promise to themselves. Never again will they pretend to be someone who can handle the responsibility of being loved. Never again will they put someone through the slow torture of loving someone made of ice. Never again will they allow themselves to hope that they might be capable of thawing. The fortress they build in your absence isn't just protection, it's penance. They're not just keeping future love out, they're keeping themselves in, imprisoned by their own conviction that they are fundamentally flawed in ways that make them dangerous to anyone who dares to care about them. But here's what breaks my heart about their construction project. They're building these walls not just to protect themselves, but to protect everyone else from the winter storm they believe themselves to be. In their mind, your leaving isn't just proof that they can't sustain love, it's proof that they shouldn't even try. Chapter 3. The Frozen Heart Syndrome. Without your gentle warmth, consistently trying to reach the tender places inside them, something devastating happens to their emotional core. The heart that was merely cold when you were together now crystallizes into something harder, more brittle, more beautiful and terrible than winter itself. Like Elsa's heart turning to ice when she believes love is impossible, they undergo a transformation that makes their previous emotional unavailability seem warm by comparison. You were the sun they never quite let reach them fully, but your distant light still kept their heart from freezing solid. Your presence created just enough heat to maintain their emotional state somewhere between winter and spring, never quite blooming, but never completely dormant either. Now, in the Arctic silence of your absence, that last bit of warmth evaporates, and their heart completes its transformation into something beautiful, but untouchable. The frozen heart syndrome isn't anger or bitterness. Those emotions require too much heat to sustain. Instead, it's a crystalline clarity that settles over their entire emotional landscape. They stop feeling the messy, complicated emotions that made loving you so exhausting. The guilt over their inability to reciprocate your affection? Gone. The anxiety about disappointing you with their emotional limitations? vanished. The small, persistent ache of longing for connection they could never quite silence, frozen solid. What emerges in place of these messy human feelings is something that looks almost like peace. They move through their days with the serene confidence of someone who has finally accepted their true nature. No more struggling against their frozen heart, trying to force it to beat warmly for someone else. No more exhausting themselves with attempts to be something they were never meant to be. They become colder than they ever were with you, but this coldness has a terrible beauty to it. It's not the desperate cold of someone fighting their own nature. It's the elegant cold of someone who has finally embraced it completely. They develop a kind of crystalline charm, sharp and lovely, and completely untouchable. They become the winter queen of their own story, ruling over a kingdom where nothing grows, but nothing dies either. The most heartbreaking part of this transformation is how relief floods through them once their heart finishes freezing. All those years of feeling like a broken version of a human being, all that shame about their inability to love properly, it melts away when they finally stop trying to love at all. The pressure is gone. The expectations have evaporated. The exhausting performance of pretending to want closeness has ended. In their frozen state, they can appreciate beauty without wanting to possess it. They can observe love without feeling obligated to participate in it. They can watch other people's emotional seasons change without feeling like they should be changing too. There's a terrible freedom in surrendering completely to their winter nature. But here's the paradox that would break your heart if you could see it. In becoming completely frozen, they finally achieve a kind of perfection. They become exactly what they always believed themselves to be. Someone made for solitude. Someone whose love could only ever be a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. The frozen heart doesn't break anymore because ice doesn't break. It shatters all at once or remains perfectly intact forever. Chapter 4. The Curse of Self-Fulfilling Prophecy. Deep in the chambers of their heart, there has always lived a whisper that sounded like truth. You are not meant to be loved. You are too much winter, not enough spring. You will only bring frost to anything beautiful that tries to grow near you. Your departure doesn't plant this belief. It waters it until it blooms into their entire identity. They've spent their whole life waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when someone would finally see them clearly and choose to leave. And here you are, doing exactly what that voice always said you would do. In their mind, this isn't abandonment, it's revelation. You haven't broken their heart. You've simply confirmed what their heart always knew about itself. There's almost a sense of relief in this confirmation, terrible as it is. For years, they've carried the exhausting burden of hoping they might be wrong about themselves, that maybe they could learn to love properly, that perhaps their frozen heart could somehow learn to beat warmly for another person. Your leaving lifts this burden from their shoulders. They can finally stop pretending they might be capable of the kind of love that other people seem to give and receive so naturally. The prophecy fulfills itself with mathematical precision. They believed they were unlovable, so they became someone who couldn't sustain love. They feared they would drive away anyone who got close, so they created the conditions that made getting close impossible. They were convinced they were made for solitude, so they transformed themselves into someone who could only exist alone. But here's the heartbreaking truth about self-fulfilling prophecies. They don't just predict the future, they create it. Every wall they built to protect themselves from abandonment made abandonment more likely. Every way they tried to prepare for your eventual departure made your departure more inevitable. They didn't just fear being left alone, they engineered the exact conditions that would ensure they would be. Now, standing in the ruins of what you built together, they survey the wreckage with a kind of grim satisfaction. See, that voice whispers. I told you, this was always how it would end. You are winter itself, beautiful from a distance, but impossible to live with up close. And instead of questioning this voice, they embrace it as their truest advisor. The curse deepens because they take your leaving as evidence not just of their unlovability, but of their fundamental nature. If they couldn't make it work with you, understanding, patient you who tried so hard to reach them, then clearly the problem isn't circumstantial. The problem is essential. The problem is them. They begin to wear their inability to sustain love like a crown of ice. beautiful and terrible and completely isolating. They transform their deepest wound into their greatest source of pride. They become the winter queen who needs no kingdom because she has learned to rule over emptiness itself. The prophecy completes itself when they stop trying to prove it wrong and start trying to prove it right. They become someone who not only can't sustain love, but someone who doesn't want to try. They don't just accept their frozen nature, they perfect it. Chapter 5. The Kingdom of One. In the vast expanse of their self-imposed exile, they create something that looks almost like paradise, if paradise were made entirely of ice and silence and the terrible beauty of perfect solitude. Like Elsa in her mountain palace, they discover there's a kind of magnificent freedom in ruling over a kingdom where they are the only subject, the only citizen, the only heartbeat in the endless quiet. Here, in this crystalline realm of their own making, they never have to worry about disappointing anyone with their emotional limitations. They never have to feel the crushing weight of someone else's hope pressing against their frozen heart. They never have to navigate the impossible complexity of trying to love someone back when love feels like a language they were never taught to speak. The Kingdom of One is perfectly climate controlled for someone made of winter. Every room is exactly the right temperature to keep their heart from melting. Every conversation is with themselves, so they never have to translate their feelings into words that another person could understand. Every relationship is with their own reflection, so they never risk the terrible vulnerability of being truly seen. They develop rituals in this place that look almost like happiness. Morning coffee becomes a meditation on solitude. Evening walks become celebrations of independence. The silence that once felt like emptiness transforms into a symphony of peace that only they can hear. They learn to love their own company with an intensity that borders on devotion. But the most beautiful and terrible thing about their kingdom is how perfectly it protects them from ever having to risk their heart again. In this place, they can admire love from a safe distance, the way one admires a painting in a museum, beautiful, meaningful, but completely untouchable. They can observe other people's emotional seasons changing without feeling obligated to change their own. They create art from their isolation, poetry from their loneliness, philosophy from their detachment. They become students of love rather than practitioners of it, scholars of connection rather than participants in it. There's a kind of tragic nobility in this transformation, watching them become experts in the very thing they've decided they can never have. The Kingdom of One becomes more than just a place of exile. It becomes a place of identity. They don't just live alone, they become someone who was always meant to live alone. They don't just choose solitude, they embody it so completely that solitude chooses them back. In their perfect kingdom, they are finally safe from the thing that has always terrified them most, the possibility that someone might love them and expect to be loved in return. Here, surrounded by walls of their own making and protected by winter of their own creation, they achieve the ultimate victory over vulnerability. But kingdoms of one have a peculiar quality. They're breathtakingly beautiful and absolutely unsustainable. Even winter queens sometimes catch themselves listening for footsteps in the snow, wondering if someone might be brave enough to climb the mountain and knock on the palace door. The question that haunts their perfect solitude is the one they can never quite freeze completely. What if someone were willing to love winter itself? Chapter 6. The Path Back to Summer. Here's where the story could turn, where winter might remember that it was once capable of spring, but only if the frozen heart chooses to beat again. You cannot be their Anna, throwing yourself against the palace doors, begging them to let you save them from eternal winter. You cannot love them back to life, cannot melt their heart with the warmth of your devotion, cannot pull them from their kingdom of ice through sheer force of caring. The path back to summer exists, but it's a journey only they can choose to take. It begins not with missing you, but with missing themselves, the version of themselves that existed before they decided that winter was their only season. It starts when the perfect silence of their kingdom becomes so complete that they can finally hear the small, persistent voice they've been trying to freeze, the part of them that still believes in the possibility of warmth. Some frozen hearts never choose to thaw. Some winter queens rule their crystalline kingdoms until the end of time, finding a kind of tragic peace in perfect eternal solitude. And that has to be okay, because the alternative, staying trapped in their blizzard, trying to bring spring to someone determined to remain winter, will only freeze your own heart in the process. If they ever do choose the difficult path back to warmth, it won't be because they realize they lost something precious when you left. It will be because they finally understand that they lost themselves long before you ever arrived. The journey back to emotional life isn't about learning to love someone else. It's about learning to forgive themselves for being human enough to need love in the first place. Their healing, if it comes, will look nothing like the movies. There will be no grand gesture, no moment of sudden clarity where they realize what they've lost and come running after you with newfound emotional availability. Instead, there will be small, private moments of thawing. A tear that doesn't freeze before it falls, a memory of laughter that doesn't turn to ice, a dream of spring that doesn't transform into nightmare. The most loving thing you can do for someone lost in their own eternal winter is to find your way back to your own spring and stay there. Not as a beacon calling them home, but as proof that seasons can change, that hearts can heal, that love doesn't have to end in ice. Your warmth, preserved and protected, becomes evidence that not everyone who touches winter gets frozen by it. You can understand their spiral into cold with compassion while still refusing to freeze alongside them. You can feel heartbroken by their choice to embrace endless winter while still choosing endless summer for yourself. You can love them from the warm place in your heart while keeping that warm place safe from their blizzard.